on here.
I quit drinking during the week.
All right, welcome into We Talk Ball, a special Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Chris. You can find me on Twitter at CFB Talk on X, and then you can also follow our YouTube channel at College Sports Crew. I am joined not by Austin Knight. He had a family emergency, but our coach Pops is here, and we got an awesome guest, Monte Burke. Did I say that right?
Monty,
yeah, sorry.
I don't mind the Monte. I don't mind that, or Montel, whatever you want to call me. I
practiced it all day and then I butchered it. I knew it. I was going to. I was
got best-selling. New York Times best-selling author.
New York Times best-selling author. Yeah. So he wrote the book on Saban and making a coach. We get mainly into the Men of Troy, that book, and the Pete Carroll era. But on the Saban book, I've always wanted to ask you this. I remember when Saban went to that press conference and he had that epic rant about the book, and it's kind of a three-parter. Like, I remember him doing that, and I was kind of frustrated because I was like, "Oh, the book was so good," and I had my best friend's a Bama fan. And I was like, "Oh, great, he's not going to read the book now," because Saban said, he went on this rant. He did end up reading the book and he loved it, but he didn't for years because Nick Saban told him not to. But like, how did that? Like, what was your reaction when that happened? And I have a theory also on why he did that. Do you know why he did? And did it affect the book selling at all?
I'd love to hear your theory first. So it was kind of a weird thing, actually, because he and I had been like, he knew what was coming, right? I ran the whole, he participated a little bit, and then he kind of pulled his participation, said I was like revealing too many secrets and there's rat poison and all this kind of stuff. And then, but he knew what was going on. And in fact, he supplied me with, his two best golfing partners and other people like that. So he knew, and I ran the whole thing by him. So it was a little bit of a weird, I was kind of like, what? And I was on book tour. I was actually in Alabama. I remember I was driving. I just finished I just finished a talk and a signing at a bookstore outside of Mobile. And I was driving my way back up to, I think I was going to Birmingham next and then Huntsville or something like that. So yeah, it was a little bit weird. It was weird to be like in a deli I remember I was in a deli the next day and they had a huge TV. I was there with my kids and my brother, and on the TV right behind me, there was Feinbaum talking about, Saban's rant and all this kind of stuff. It was really bizarre, out of body experience. But, in the end, it may have turned off like real hardcore fans, but in the end, it brought a lot more attention to it.
I definitely for me, my theory was the Hillary Clinton stuff that was in the book. That was my theory. Yeah. I had read that part, and I think I remember I seen a couple of websites put that out there. Yeah. And I don't know if the timeline, that was a long time ago. I don't know if they went together, but that was my theory. Like the Hillary Clinton.
That was leaked. Someone read it. I forget who did it, but some internet person read it first and then put that out there. And it still, by the way, makes the rounds all the time. It just was when the Michigan coach got in trouble, everyone was recycling that. It gets recycled every couple of years because someone inevitably messes up in that way. But yeah, so my understanding was that Miss Terry did not like that little bit in there. But I had that, reported that out really well because I needed to make sure it was right. So I had, one guy tell me, and then I asked like another guy, then I asked another guy. So I had like 4 or 5 people be like, "Oh yeah, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen." And so to me, it's great advice. It's like it is, and that's why it keeps getting recycled. I think because it is such good advice. I tell my kids, I don't frame it in that way, but I say, don't ever pick a fight with someone who has less to lose than you do.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So going into like tying that into the Men of Troy and Pete Carroll, them two could not be more opposite. Could you kind of explain, because you've done both books, and could you kind of explain, the difference between them two since you've finished a Pete Carroll book?
Absolutely. So what's interesting, actually, they do have some similarities. They both love football. They both were undersized players. They both played in the secondary. Both of them played safety. Both of them were kind of, they played a lot because they were really smart. but they were undersized and not quite as fast, and both had kind of aspirations to play at a higher level than college, and neither did. And both, of course, are defensive geniuses in their own way. I mean, Carroll's more of a kind of Monte Kiffin disciple. Saban's a little bit different, but so there are some similarities. However, what was really, really fun about doing this book on this little era of USC, which is where Carroll kind of got his methodology down pat, was that they were so different, and the way that they went about things. I mean, Carroll was at the time, especially that time, was the strangest coach out there. I mean, everything he did was totally unorthodox. He didn't mind being called a player's coach. He wanted to be a player's coach. He used a lot of psychology, which he had studied. He was a product of the Summer of Love in the Bay Area, where he grew up. He went to Grateful Dead concerts. He had some Far Eastern kind of mysticism in there as well. And, it had not worked for Carroll. He was a great coordinator, kind of worked his way up the ranks as a coordinator. And then he became the coach of the Jets for a year. And, the inmates ran the asylum. And one of my favorite scenes in the book, he's at his opening press conference for the New York Jets. He just gets hired. And the first thing he says is, "Ladies and gentlemen, there are no rules for this team." And the camera kind of pans to Leon Hess, who owns the team. And he's sitting there with his arms crossed and his eyes wide open, like, what the hell have I got? And so then, that didn't work. He got fired after a year, which is very unusual. Just happened to him again, but that doesn't happen that often. And then takes a couple of years with the 49ers working under George Seifert. Then he goes and takes over the Patriots and doesn't do a terrible job there, but they kind of have declining results as the time goes on. And again, Robert Kraft had no idea what to do with this guy. He'd never met a football coach like this guy. So the kind of traditional model of a football coach is the more militaristic model, right? Is the sort of Saban or Bill Belichick kind of thing. Carroll was the opposite. Carroll was usually goes that the head coach is the bad cop, and then the assistant coaches kind of play good cop. The head coach would come over and yell at a player, and then an assistant coach will run over and be like, "No, this is what he meant, man. It's all cool." It was exactly the opposite with Carroll. I mean, when he was at USC, Eddie Orgeron was his best bad cop. And there's another scene I'll mention really quickly. A great illustration of this is Orgeron has Manny Wright in there, who actually would play a later role with the Nick Saban team when he was with the Dolphins. But he has Manny Wright in there. Manny's just not doing well in school, and he's kind of lazy and all this kind of stuff. And Eddie's just tearing him up. I mean, to the point where Manny is crying. Carroll hears this, comes running down the hall, runs into Ed's office, and is like, "Dude, what are you doing? You can't do that to one of our players." He just reams out Ed Orgeron. Manny Wright gets up to leave, and then Carroll turns to leave. And the last thing he does is he turns around at Ed Orgeron and he winks and smiles. Then he leaves. So it's like unorthodox, playing the good cop and using psychology. Like that scene really kind of like captured a lot of Pete Carroll.
Yeah. Pops, I'm gonna let you kind of lead the way since you just finished the book.
Well, I haven't finished it. I'm on Viva Sanchez right now. So I started reading last night. I had to put it down after about 3:30 this morning. I'm on the West Coast, by the way. So that wasn't just a little bit of 12 hours ago for me, a little over 12 hours. And your whole answer, you just led into like 9 of my questions over here. My first question, you talked about methodology, right?
Yep.
And I told you this when we were talking behind the scenes in the studio that the book, I couldn't put the book down after I got past chapters 1 and 2. And I don't mean this in a bad way. And if you look here, it says Coach Pops. And if there's a coach out here right now listening, take your time through chapters 1 and 2 and study that. Because my question is it's so interesting to me. You talk about Maslow, you talk about Galway, you talk about Michael Murphy, who wrote Golf in the Kingdom, which that is actually was required reading at University of Arkansas by Dr. Anna Smithnick's class there. My question is this, though. He talks about how big was the turning point when he was in New Hampshire, kind of putting all of that together. Yep. And then he tied it with the John Wooden book.
Yep.
And then, to me, he kind of figured out who he wanted to be as a coach. But now, what would have happened if North Carolina would have called? Would he have been the same Pete Carroll? Would it have worked there? Or I don't think it would have, but tell me what you think.
Great question. So that year in the wilderness, right? I mean, he'd been fired by the Jets and then fired by the Patriots and then not hired for a year. I mean, this is a guy supposedly in the prime of his coaching life who's really down to one more strike, right? I mean, if you get fired 3 times in a short period of time like that, you're a lifetime coordinator. which his mentor, Monte Kiffin, turned out to be, but was fine with it. Carroll was not going to be fine with that. So, I think that year in New Hampshire was really like the most important year of his coaching career in a weird way, because he figured out not only his methodology, but he also figured out that all of this had to have parameters, right? He couldn't let the inmates run the asylum. There had to be parameters of discipline around his framework. And so and then, having going to college was also super, super important. Being with kids who were a little more impressionable. And at that time, they were a captive audience for 3 to 4 years. There was a transfer portal and all that sort of stuff. So that's also important. Now, I think he would have taken that UNC job for sure. And, I think the fact, who knows how that would have worked out. Maybe he would have figured it out there. It's not necessarily known as a football powerhouse. Lawrence Taylor and Drake May accepted, so I don't really know. But I do think also being on the West Coast, being back in California, being in this land of, especially around Hollywood, this land of make-believe, this land of where people have different, viewpoints and they have different ideas and it's kind of okay. It's like part of their culture, right? The East Coast is very, especially where I am in the Northeast, especially Boston and New York, is very uptight, very puritanical, very people don't think about this, but they're super uptight up here. Trust me, I lived in the South, I've lived up here. So, and they're not necessarily, they like tradition and all that kind of stuff. So they're not necessarily receptive to these new ideas. Going to USC, which had this great tradition. It was not like when Nick Saban went to Alabama, actually. It was like coming to a school that expected football excellence, that hadn't had it for, they were going on about 2 decades of not being really, really relevant, right? So a hungry school and a hungry coach, again, like Saban in Alabama, just turned out to be this kind of perfect mix. And then, like I said before, having these college kids to kind of try this out. Like it took a little while, right? It took a little while for this all to kind of start, gelling a little bit. It took probably season and a quarter or season and a third almost to kind of really get this thing going. So yeah, I mean, it's really the North Carolina job. It's a little bit like, if Saban had gotten Drew Brees and not Dante Culpepper. It's like these what ifs, these butterfly effect things that, could have taken these coaches on totally different trajectories,
Right. I see that too, because I don't think you would have had the success because I think the star power, the Hollywood, the lights. I think that it definitely at the during the heyday put a spotlight on that on his program, but I think he would probably ended up where he was supposed to end up, but the stars lined up perfectly for him.
Yeah, and you're right too about the celeb culture is a really important part of this whole story, right?
Mm-hmm.
This sort of getting these. Becoming a winner in a city that had no NFL teams at the time, so it was a vacuum, and he filled it with a winning program. And those celebs, they love nothing more than being affiliated with winners, right? So that all of a sudden, Snoop and Will Ferrell and the Fonz and Arnold and you name it, they're not just at the games; they're at practices as well. He also, one unknown thing about Pete Carroll at that time, or less known thing, I think, is that he had open practices. He didn't care.
Yeah.
He didn't care. Come watch. He wanted the vibe, and he didn't care if you saw his plays. He didn't care if there was a scout from the other team. He didn't care. They were going to run over you anyway. So all of that, I mean, think about that recruiting advantage too. I mean, I remember talking to the punter, and he was like, I'd be practicing my punts and look over 3 feet from you. There was Snoop Dogg.
Snoop, yeah.
I mean, imagine if you're a high school kid, you go out there and you visit and you high five Snoop Dogg, and he's like, "What's up?" You're like, "I'm probably going to go to USC."
Yeah,
and that happened. That actually happened several times. You pointed that out in your book. So yeah, Chris, I'm sorry. Go ahead, big guy. I know you probably got some question over there.
No, you're doing great. I would love to know, because you had talked about in the title, the wild times and stuff. Was there anything in the book that you couldn't include because it was just too wild? I
mean, there were rumors which I couldn't. I mean, my rule is I'm an old feel old school in this way, but I grew up at Forbes, was where I kind of cut my teeth as a journalist. And you had to have, for every kind of controversial or big fact, you had to have at least 3 sources, right? And so I still live by that rule, right? So
the right way.
I heard some crazy stuff, right? So unless I heard it from the person themselves, if Pete Carroll told me something, or if Lendale White told me something, Lendale White told me he got money, right? So I'm okay with that. But if it was wild stuff, like I really needed to hear, 2 or 3 sources. So, I mean, the wild, I think it's implied. There was a lot, and then also there's this talk of it's not implied in some, it's actually explicit in other places, but I mean, there was a lot of partying, I'll put it that way. There was a lot of partying. And I mean, I loved, I mean, they own the town, I mean, they would go out. There's another scene in the book where they're going to the hottest club in LA, and the promoter comes out and, you guys come on in. He's getting in all these college kids, and the San Diego Chargers with Sean
yes.
are standing in line being like, what the hell? How are these guys getting in before us? So, I mean, they literally own the town. And, there was a point when Reggie Bush, but particularly Matt Leinart, were more as famous or more famous than some of the celebs who came to watch them. Matt Leinart was in, I was looking through old issues of Us Weekly and People, which was sort of like the TMZ had just started, but it was like the gossip pages back then. And, it'd be like Robert De Niro was spotted out at Spago, and Matt Leinart was spotted out with Britney Spears and Paris Hilton at wherever, Chateau Marmont or whatever. So it was just this insane thing that I don't think. One thing was cool about this, because it had never happened before, and I think because of the way that college football is structured now, and because of the way that it came down so hard in that program, I don't think it'll ever happen again. And their football team.
I was just fixing to ask that, but you already answered. Yeah, I was just could we see? Because if I was asking Pops the other day when we had a meeting about this, like I don't think social media back then was like massive and big like it is today, and I was wanting to ask that, like, do you think we could see something like that again now, especially with Raleigh? I know it's not going great, but if Raleigh gets USC humming, could we see that kind of Los Angeles crazy celebrities, all that stuff again?
I mean, maybe, but Snoop made it cool, man. He'd be wearing like USC gear, right? And then all of a sudden gangbangers all are wearing USC gear, and then Will Ferrell captured a whole different demographic, right?
Yeah.
The Governor was there, and like I said, Henry Winkler, played the Fonz, and was one of their biggest fans. His kid went to school there at the time, and they would just be there. And it was just like, I don't know, it was just this crazy. So I think Riley could probably get a couple guys to come, but would he have open practice? Probably not.
No.
Would he have Snoop standing next to the punter? Probably not, So,
but it was totally different, though. I mean, there's a part of your book where many drivers showed up, and no one, only because so she could say she was there. Right. Stars wanted to be there because their name got put out. That's crazy.
Listeners would go there. I love. There's the guy who played the other Terminator in Terminator 2. Like the guy who's not as well known as Arnold, right?
Right.
He's there too. Like they're definitely, their publicists were like, what you need to do today is you need to go to a USC practice and get in front of a camera. So it was so funny.
And I got to give the comic relief here because it was in the book and I died laughing. Also, Diddy was there, and in the book it goes, "That sounds weird." Just putting this out there.
I mean, they went to house parties at Diddy's house.
I know. I was like, it said some weird stuff was going on. And they're like, "Oh, I wonder what that could have been." Oh my God! So I have a question. So Norm Chow obviously was very important, and he got Lane Kiffin thrown on him, right? But how? Because to me, after reading your book, and like I said, I think I'm at chapter 18 now, but it seemed like his success was making Kiffin, not Kiffin, but Pete Carroll jealous. Was that kind of a start of his downfall a little bit, in your opinion? Because there were people saying that you could look over and because Chow was getting the credit for the offense as he should have. But there was a change though that Pete Carroll made when they started doing the outside stuff, which I thought was a great coaching deal. And to Chow's credit, he ran with it. But to me, I feel like he kind of messed up right there with that. What's your thought?
I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, sort of this book is about, on a kind of meta level, is like how hard it is to maintain greatness, right? I even have you can get to the mountaintop, but how do you stay up there? Saban has skewed all of this for us, right? We look at everything through a different lens because he messed it up for all of us. But I even have a chapter in there called Surviving Greatness, right? So it's like, it's really hard. But so when Carroll got to USC, like I said, he was down to his third strike, one more firing, and he's a lifetime coordinator. So he put his ego aside and he hired, he kept Ed Orgeron, which was genius. Ed Orgeron's probably the best DL coach, arguably the best DL coach in college football history. If you go back to Miami, he coached Warren Sapp and Russell Merrill and all those guys. And then, he hired Norm Chow, who for those of you who don't know, was the offensive coordinator at BYU, tutored Jim McMahon, Steve Young, Ty Detmer, was part of that Robbie Bosco-led national title team. So it was like kind of an offensive genius. So he put that ego aside. And then, of course, he had, a Nepo baby hire, which he had to do, which was get Lane in there because Monte Kiffin had been Pete's mentor for so long. And in fact, Pete had babysat for Lane when Lane was like 2 years old. And then Steve Sarkisian, who came in with Norm Chow. So Sarkisian and Lane at that time were like, maybe a year or two older than some of the players that they're coaching. So all this is going really great. And then it does seem like, depending on who you talk to, I think it's two things. I think ego was involved there a little bit. I think Norm was getting a lot of credit the offense is always going to get more credit than the defense, right? Mm-hmm. Although Carroll arguably brought defense to the Pac-10 for the first time in a long time. But, but I also think it's a little bit of like, you remember when Tiger Woods used to change his swing every once in a while because he was kind of getting bored? Like he would just like change his swing and he'd kind of be off for like 6 months and then it would fire on again and he would win another couple of majors. I feel like Carroll was kind of like that too. Like, let me just change it up because I'm getting a little not bored, but he's like restless with what's going on. Let me change up, see if I can do it, with my guys, with just my guys. I got in, and it's not like he had bad coordinators. I mean, he may have promoted Sark and Lane maybe a little earlier than they should have been. There's a good argument that says if he keeps Norm Chow, then he wins 3 in a row, which makes that dynasty immortal. No one's done that in the modern era of college football. And it doesn't look like anyone's going to do it anytime soon, the way that NIL is going. So, there's an argument that, hang on to those guys for another year or so like that. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's one of those, they're dynamic. They're so funny about talking about each other too. They tiptoe around that very much. I mean, I think there's a mutual respect, but also a mutual sort of like disdain at the same time.
Gotcha. So you led into a perfect question here, and I'm sorry, but reading that, it's like you said, the Nepo baby. Lane was an asshole. Like he was an asshole there. And there was one great. My question. So my question was this: is my fourth question here. But Lane Kiffin, this part of the book caught me, and it was so telling. It's in the book where you're talking about where they're riding into work together. And Kiffin looks over at Chow and goes, "Man, why are you always so uptight?" And I was telling Chris, I'm like, "Dude, this guy didn't go to sleep. He didn't do anything before the games. He was nerve-wracked." And he looks over at Kiffin and he goes, "Because if I don't do well, my family doesn't eat." And he goes, "That's when I realized that this kid had been spoon-fed everything." Like, and then I look at Kiffin, I look at what he did at Oakland, I look at Tennessee, I look at USC, and I look at what he's done, was it USF and then at Ole Miss and then everything.
Ole Miss,
but he was at Ole Miss and you see him go to LSU, and I'm like, well, hell, that explains half his damn behavior, and it started right here. Do you agree or not? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think Kiffin's fascinating, personally. I mean, it was when I
that
went.
Should be your next book.
No. I already got a next book for him.
All right, I want to hear all your suggestions because I need to get going on one. When I went to visit Kiffin, he was still at Ole Miss, so he's in Oxford, and I never forget. Like, I was waiting outside, and then the secretary came and said, "Coach Kiffin's ready for you." I walk in, and he had just been doing hot yoga, and he had a yellow lab that was running in and out of his office, but. He's a for a guy who, is a Nepo baby. At least that's how he started. Like he's a pretty thoughtful and pretty interesting guy. Like, I wouldn't necessarily want him to coach my favorite team at this point. Although who knows, he might, LSU might be the perfect spot for him. I don't really know, but I find him to be truly fascinating guy just because, also you got to think about with Lane. I mean, he's an acknowledged offensive genius, right? Mm-hmm. But his 3 main mentors are his father, Monte Kiffin, the architect of the Tampa 2 defense, Nick Saban, of course, a defensive guy, and Pete Carroll, a defensive guy. And so of all those guys, the one he's probably the most like would be Carroll, I would say, which is really, really interesting. But it's weird to have a offensive genius come from that tree, if you will, of defensive guys. But yeah, I mean, I just loved hearing about those guys and talking to those, especially those 2 young guys, like about, those really early formative years. I mean, that was their formative experience. These 2 guys who are now at the top of the heap in college football, that was where they started.
I like it. Chris, you got a question here, or what?
Oh
You
yeah,
got a question?
yeah. I would love to ask because our buddy Austin, he couldn't come on, and we were talking last night when we were talking about the show. You know, he wanted to get this in. What goes into something, a book like this? Like, I don't remember what Austin and Pops told me how many you interviewed on this one, but I know the Saban one, I believe, is like 400 people. If I'm
I
right.
think Saban was a little more than 250, if I remember.
Okay,
correctly.
a little more than 250. So, like, what goes into a book like this? Like, because to me, like, I hear that and it's like it makes me like freak out.
Yeah.
Like, that just sounds like a lot.
This one was a little bit different because it's not a straight. Although Pete Carroll is, a main character, if not the main character of the book. It's not a straight biography, right? It's actually about an era, and so there are lots of characters in there. There's Leinert's a big character, Lendale White's a big character, Ed Orgeron's a big character, the O-line coach Pat Rule is a big character. So you had all these different characters to kind of juggle. But I love doing it because I'm a football nerd, so I love for this book to watch the USC Notre Dame Bush push game 2005 game. I have to watch it 12 times. I mean, it was really fun to watch the USC Texas game, even to watch like USC Fresno State,
that was a great game.
It's just really fun. It's really fun. But then, so that's the kind of, that's the part that I can do here. And then it's a lot of like, all right, who do I know from previous experience that I could start with, to start kind of getting this story, I always look at it as like the reporting and the research part is like every little nugget that I research and every interview I do is like a little piece of a puzzle. And I'm just taking those pieces of puzzle and I'm throwing them in a big box at this point because I'm not, if I was better organized, I'd throw them in different boxes, but it's just one big box. And then there's a point in your reporting when you start hearing the same stories over and over and over again. And that's kind of when I know, all right, I'm kind of getting there, The advantage too I had with this book is that or not an advantage, but a cool thing, different thing that I have from the same book is that I actually got 7 long interviews with Carroll when he was kind of before he got hired with the Raiders. So he was relaxed and all that kind of stuff. So that was cool. So then, you take that when you feel like you've done all the reporting, you take that box of puzzle pieces, you throw them on the floor, and then I got to figure out how to put them all together. Right. And so that can be kind of a little bit of a painful experience, but once you've kind of got a good framework, then you can kind of sit down and write it. But I love meeting people in person as much as I can. I mean, that's always better, right? To see people in their element. And then, if that doesn't work, then I'll usually do a phone call. I find Zoom to be kind of distracting. People are always like, I notice people are like looking at their hair and stuff like that. They're like not always locked in. A phone, I feel like you can sit back in your phone and close your eyes and you can remember better. You're not being vain at all. And then, it's just a matter of hunting people down. I mean, actually one of my first interviews was with the Texas linebacker, Drew Kelson, who was the one who made the play that probably stopped USC from winning 3 in a row. He never gets credit for it, but he's the first one who staggered Lendale White on that 4th and 2 play that he ended up being about 6 inches short of, which would have iced the game, which would have been 3 in a row for USC, right? And so it was fun to start with him and get his whole experience. And he was great. I mean, he didn't talk just about the game and about that play, but he talked about Texas watching them that whole year and like that underdog itch and what Vince was like when Vince Young, when he came back from the Heisman Trophy ceremony and felt like he'd gotten shafted. Reggie Bush won, so you just talk, hey, Drew, who else should I talk to? I'll talk to this guy, and then so it's the reporting part is really fun. I don't know which one I like better, but it's like extroverted and then totally introverted, right? So then I'll lock myself away for 8-9 months, a year, depending on what it is, and just sit here in my office and, grow a nasty beard and kids look at me funny and stuff like that. But it's I love both parts of them. The only part I don't like is promoting the damn books when they're out. That part I could do without.
Yeah, that's I could imagine because I actually went and like listened to a bunch of your radio interviews. I couldn't imagine it's probably a lot to deal with. But yeah,
it's fun. I mean, I shouldn't complain about it, but it's always like it's a harrowing experience, right? It's like I've lost control of it, and someone else got control of it. It's just weird. That's all it is. It's weird more than anything.
Yeah,
else.
it's a weird. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming on the show here and promoting on our show here.
Of course. I like the podcast format is much more enjoyable, I feel like.
Well,
Yes.
we got plenty of podcasts. We'll let you come on. I'll let you come on my show and promote your show. That'd be great. But so, question, because in your book you talk about that Pete Carroll, he can't sit still. He's always. So how hard was it for you to lock him in for those long interviews? And then once you got all the pieces in a box and threw them out and got them in a piece, and then you put the book out, it was published, and now you're doing this, and you're drinking that wine, whatever your drink is, you're going, was there a time where you went, damn, what question I missed this? What question was that you missed that didn't get answered in your book that you wish you'd have went after?
Great question. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily, I mean, I really went through it with Carroll. You know, I mean, like 7 long interviews is a lot. And he was hard to, it was great because it was before he was looking for a job, but he wasn't like active, you know, the season was still going on and there was no reason for him to be that active in that. And he was at his fishing cabin and he would always start the interview kind of mellow. And then at some point he'd get really jazzed up about something and start, you know, then he kind of come down a little bit. Then he did, you know, it was typical Pete Carroll. I don't think there's anything I didn't ask him. But, you know, I mean, there are, you know, you always look back and they're like, oh, maybe I could have dove in a little harder in that. But this was already a really long book to begin with, right? It was the longest book I've ever written. And, at one point I actually was discarding things, right? So like I had an extra 15,000 words in this actually. I had a 20,000 word section on Carroll in the beginning that I shrunk down to 5,000 words. And so to me, it was more of a, you know, of like, I wish I could have left that in, you know, like it was more about what I had to discard to kind of keep the flow going and people weren't getting bogged down. And like, you know, I interviewed Boomer Esiason from the Jets, who was his quarterback at the Jets. You know, I interviewed his backup quarterback at the Patriots. Like to me, those were all really fun interviews that I had to ditch because I just didn't have the space for them really.
Gotcha. Well, like I said, I think I'm chapter 18 or 17. It's with Viva Sanchez. Yeah, anyway, I had to put the book down after I got through chapters 1 and 2 because that just enthralled me. I was started reading and I looked up, it's 3:30 in the morning. I'm like, I got to go to bed. I won't be here for this interview. I couldn't put it down and I loved it. And so my Alabama question, but it's not really an Alabama question. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you. I did not read the first book, The Saban Making of a Coach. I was somewhere off in the military at that time, I'm sure. So I probably missed that one, but after reading this one, I'm definitely getting it. And you even brought it up here in this interview also. And Kiffin brought it up in part of his interview that was in the book, the two styles, the two methodologies of Saban, more militaristic and versus the psychological, the player's coach with the what he has going on, you know, around him. Which style of coaching is more sustainable over the long term?
I mean, it's a great question because one thing that's really interesting about Carroll is that he proved he could do it. It worked in college. Now, of course, part of the reason that program got in trouble, that it fell off a cliff, is because, you know, that greatest strength kind of thing spun out of control, right? And so in that way, being the more militaristic way is probably a little more sustainable. Then again, Carroll went on to prove that it could work in the pros as well, right? I mean, he went to a franchise that was not doing very well in Seattle and drafted well and coached really well and got that same vibe going there too. Like, so then it ran out a little bit, but you know, it's a fact. So I don't really know. I'll put it this way. Nick Saban was more sustainable. You know, that was just more sustainable than what Pete Carroll did. But you know, it's an eternal question. And it's interesting to me that, you know, a lot of people, especially with Carroll, you know, getting fired after this last year, and you know, I don't think he'll be as well regarded as he would have been if he'd come along at a different era with different peers, because he comes along, you know, it's a historically unfortunate time for him anyway, or for his legacy, comes along with Nick Saban, who's I think is unquestionably the greatest college coach of all time, and then Bill Belichick, who I also think unquestionably is the greatest NFL coach of all time. And then you got Pete Carroll somewhere in the middle here. So, and they all kind of retired or left football at around the same time, right? So it was very overshadowed. I'm not saying that Carroll's a Mount Rushmore. He's not the top 4, top 5, but he's probably in the top 12, probably maybe top 15 of all time. I mean, he's just and then you add in the fact that he did it in a different way, which is, and football's moved towards him a little bit, right? It's moved towards his methodology and slightly away from Saban's. It's coming to some kind of middle ground a little bit. Even Saban has mellowed a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess I got one of the questions, and I know what I think, but I want to get your thought on this. Orgeron leaves, Kiffin leaves, Sarkisian leaves. Which one hurt the most in your?
I think Eddie.
I agree with you. I agree because he could recruit. You said he's the best defensive line coach. When I was at the University of Arkansas, I was a student assistant. This is the stories I heard. Randy Shannon could recruit. If he got in your living room, it was a wrap. If Ed Orgeron got in there, that was one hell of a fight between Randy Shannon and Ed Orgeron when it came to recruiting. Yep. So just the recruiting aspect alone, and you're right. He probably is one of the greatest D-line coaches ever, but no one ever looks at that because of God, my God, the 5-star recruits that man put on rosters everywhere he went is just is crazy. Yep. But that would have been my guess too.
I love talking to people who were recruited by him. I mean, he would do this thing where, I mean, in a lot of ways, that early coaching staff of Carroll's did all the kind of hard work, and then Carroll would kind of come over the top and kind of charm the parents and the kid. He'd be like the closer, the Mariano Rivera kind of thing. But
right,
Eddie would go in with that incredible enthusiasm, and he would put this vision in these kids' minds, right? Like 4th and goal, championship on the line. We run a power 27 with you, and you score the touchdown. Or sometimes he would bring a mock Heisman Trophy and plant it in the kids' living room. So he was great at like selling this vision. And the reason I think he was a bigger loss is not just the recruiting, though. It's like, he was the hammer. He was the disciplinarian. And I think that rubs off on everybody, right? I mean, there's a quote from one of the coaches later on in the book who I don't want to spoil anything for you, but one of the problems with these dynasties is you can't hold on to your assistants, right? And you stop being able to get good assistants. I mean, Carroll's assistants in his last year were just not good. I mean, he had a terrible offensive coordinator, and he promoted basically a guy who'd been a GA not too much longer to be his defensive coordinator, just because he couldn't really find anybody else to do it. So it gets your success kind of makes it harder to stay successful, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I mean, I think Eddie and they lost. What they lost when they lost Eddie was this sense of discipline, and he was the one who got the kids. If the kids missed class, he'd get them out sprinting at 5 a.m. and So yeah, I think Eddie was by far a bigger loss.
Well, one of the funny, and I'm not going to spoil it because Chris, you're going to have to read this part. But one of the
I can't wait now.
One of the funniest scenes in that whole book was when Orgeron comes around the corner at bed check, and one of the guys is literally putting his key in. I was just like, because I can see I could just see him in that old Cajun accent. I'm just like, oh my God. But yeah, exactly, because people don't realize Orgeron was built like a brick, man. He was a tank. Yep. So, but yeah, that's one of the funniest parts. So if you guys, if you're out there, you got to go to that book. I'm telling you guys, and you know what? And if you're a coach, take your time through chapters 1 and 2, because that's where a coach found himself. In my opinion, that's where a coach, he found himself and became the coach he was. And like you said, he had one shot, one chance, and he made it count with that. So yeah, and the book is Men of Troy: The Epic Afternoons, Wild Nights, and Enduring Legacy of Pete Carroll's USC Trojans. Before we end it, Sean, Coach Pops was going to let me finish it with this last question. I told the guy I had to ask this. You said earlier that you love suggestions. I'm a Georgia fan. Can we please get you, my favorite author, to write me a Kirby Smart book? Can we get a UGA Kirby Smart book next?
I've thought about that a lot, and I think Kirby certainly deserves a book at some point. The problem with Kirby is he's not controversial enough, sort of, in a weird way, and he's not super charismatic, which, by the way, makes him probably how great he is, right? He's just kind of, I mean, he's very volatile on the sidelines, right? I think I described him in the same book as look like at times like a tantrimic, toddler and a overeager golden retriever. Right? He's always jumping around like that. But I give him another championship or two, and someone's got to write about his methodology and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, Seth Emerson wrote one, and it's a good one. It's a good one. But I feel like it's a perfect book for you. Like we got to get me a Kirby Smart one. Although the Lane one, I kind of want that one too.
Yeah, and I just want to be selfish. I want to buy the hardback of this book, and can I get your address? Send it for so you can autograph it for me, please. I'm serious. As soon as we get off, I'm opening my Kindle back up on my computer and finishing the book up. Yeah. It's an amazing read, guys. It absolutely is. Absolutely.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Yes. Wait, Pops, you good? You want me to?
I'm good. I'm actually good. Monty, thank you so much for letting me be part of this. Absolutely.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been really fun.
Yes, sir. We appreciate everybody watching. Come back Thursday. Me and Austin will be back. Pops has an interview tomorrow with Meg Rim Softball. Is it Meg Rim or Meg Ram?
Meg Rimbalak is who it is.
Yeah. So that's going to be a good interview. And then also Athletes Forum podcast will be live tomorrow night also. So y'all go to our YouTube channel at College Sports Crew. Go check out all our content. And me and Austin will see you Thursday.